Chapter 1. A City Steeped in Tradition. Boston, Massachusetts, a city woven into the fabric of American identity. It is a place where cobblestone streets and colonial architecture coexist with innovation, diversity, and the enduring spirit of its people. Boston is home to some of the nation's finest institutions, like Harvard and MIT, but it is also a city that fiercely holds onto its working-class roots. From the battle cries of revolutionaries to the chants of Red Sox fans at Fenway Park, Boston has always thrived on passion, loyalty, and community. One of the city's most sacred traditions is the Boston Marathon. Established in 1897, it is the oldest annual marathon in the world, and its legacy runs deep. What began as a small race of 15 runners has grown into a globally celebrated event, attracting over 30,000 participants and 500,000 spectators each year. For Bostonians, it's more than a race. It's a communal celebration of endurance, hope, and unity. The marathon is held on Patriots' Day, a holiday unique to Massachusetts and Maine that commemorates the opening battles of the American Revolution. The symbolism is thick in the air: freedom, struggle, triumph. On that Monday in April, Boston becomes a city transformed. Streets close. Church bells ring. School children wave handmade signs. Families rise early to claim their usual spots along the 26.2-mile route, stretching from Hopkinton's rural starting line to the storied finish on Boylston Street. The days leading up to the marathon are electric. Runners from all over the world converge on the city, visiting landmarks like Fenway Park, the Freedom Trail, and Quincy Market. At the Heinz Convention Center, athletes pick up race packets and trade stories with nervous excitement. Volunteers hand out free samples of energy gels and electrolyte drinks. Local businesses fly marathon banners in their windows. Everyone has a connection to the race: a friend running, a relative volunteering, a memory of a previous year. The morning of April 15th, 2013, dawned bright and cool, the kind of day runners dream about. There was little wind, just enough sunshine to take the chill out of the air. The elite runners prepared for a grueling competition, while countless charity runners reflected on the causes they supported. Parents took pictures of their children cheering along the barricades, and strangers struck up conversations about finish times and previous marathons. At the heart of it all was Boylston Street, the vibrant finish line adorned in bold blue and yellow paint, set against the classical backdrop of the Boston Public Library. Giant screens broadcasted the runners' final strides, and broadcasters set up their equipment to catch emotional finishes. Security was present but unobtrusive, designed to ensure safety without disrupting celebration. Nothing suggested that anything was amiss. But within that crowd, two young men, Tamerlan and Jakar Sarnayev, moved with chilling calmness. They blended in with the thousands of onlookers. In their backpacks were deadly devices, pressure cooker bombs packed with nails and ball bearings, hidden from view but designed for maximum carnage. They placed the bags on the sidewalk, walked away, and disappeared into the crowd. At 2:49 p.m., as runners neared the 4-hour mark, the busiest time at the finish line, the first explosion rocked the street. Chaos erupted. Moments later, a second bomb detonated just 12 seconds and 210 yards away. The shock was immediate. Panic spread like wildfire. People screamed, ran, dropped to the ground. White smoke billowed into the sky. Shattered glass from storefronts covered the sidewalks. Blood pooled on the bricks. Shoes, backpacks, and belongings lay scattered like battlefield debris. First responders acted instantly. Police officers leapt over barricades. EMTs fashioned tourniquets out of belts. Marathon volunteers abandoned water cups to tend to the injured. Strangers tore off their shirts to stop bleeding. Doctors from the nearby medical tent, which had been set up to treat exhausted runners, became emergency trauma surgeons. The sidewalks transformed into tree of units. Despite the horror, countless acts of heroism emerged. Carlos Arredondo, a spectator who had lost his son in the Iraq War, ran toward the smoke and helped save Jeff Ballman, whose legs had been torn apart. Off-duty nurses and military veterans offered aid. Within minutes, dozens of victims were transported to nearby hospitals, many of whom underwent multiple surgeries in the days that followed. 3 lives were lost that day at the scene: 8-year-old Martin Richard, 23-year-old Lindsay Liu, and 29-year-old Crystal Campbell. More than 260 others were injured, some critically. The city fell into stunned silence. But even as fear settled into the streets of Boston, so did resolve. In that moment of tragedy, the city's true identity was revealed, not just in its historical pride or sports rivalries, but in the courage and compassion of its people. The phrase that soon echoed across television screens and social media captured that essence perfectly: Boston Strong. This story, of terror and tenacity, despair and defiance, would soon unfold into a national manhunt, an extraordinary chase, and an emotional trial. But it began, quietly and triumphantly, on a perfect April morning when Boston gathered to celebrate life, only to be forced to fight for it. The full story of that day, and everything that followed, is one of darkness and light, of horror and hope. It is a story Boston will never forget, and one the world must remember. Chapter 2: Two Brothers, Two Paths to Radicalization. Tamerlan and Jakhar Tsarnaev were ethnic Chechens who emigrated with their family from Kyrgyzstan to the United States in the early 2000s, seeking refuge and a new life. Tamerlan, the elder of the two, was already an adult by the time they arrived. He initially tried to assimilate into American life. A passionate boxer, he had once dreamed of representing the U.S. in the Olympics. However, those dreams were crushed when he was barred from competition due to his non-citizen status. This rejection triggered a spiral of disillusionment. Tamerlan began to express increasing disdain for American culture, criticizing its values and turning away from his former lifestyle. He grew a beard, adopted more conservative dress, and began attending a local mosque with increasing fervor. He consumed extremist materials online, including videos from Al-Qaeda and speeches from radical clerics. He read English-language jihadist magazines like Inspire, which glorified acts of terror. As time passed, he grew to believe that the United States was at war with Islam. Meanwhile, Jakhar, the younger brother, adapted more easily to life in America. He had friends, went to parties, and earned a scholarship to the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth. He tweeted about TV shows, music, and sports, seeming like any other American teenager. But he was also extremely close to Tamerlan, and their bond would prove fatal. Jakhar began to drift from his friends and display a change in tone on social media. He started sharing Islamic verses and expressing dissatisfaction with U.S. foreign policy. Tamerlan's journey into radicalism intensified in 2012 when he traveled to Dagestan, where he attempted to connect with Islamist groups. Though under surveillance by Russian and U.S. intelligence agencies, he returned to Boston without incident. His mindset had hardened. He lectured friends about morality, stopped listening to music, and spoke frequently about martyrdom. He believed he was on a divine mission. Jakhar, under his brother's growing influence, began to adopt his worldview. He stopped posting casual messages and began cryptically referencing jihad. The two brothers became increasingly isolated, united in a shared ideology that rationalized violence as holy war. To them, the Boston Marathon represented everything they despised about the West, a celebration of American success, freedom, and pride. Chapter 3: Preparing the Attack. The Tsarnaev brothers chose the Boston Marathon because of its visibility, symbolism, and lack of security. They wanted maximum impact, a public spectacle that would generate worldwide attention. Their plan was both simple and diabolical: use pressure cooker bombs to cause mass casualties among civilians. Inspired by bomb-making guides in jihadist literature, especially those published in Inspire, they began to purchase materials. These included fireworks for black powder, nails and ball bearings for shrapnel, and pressure cookers from local stores. They even bought remote control car parts to use in their detonators. The work was done in the cramped quarters of Tamerlan's Cambridge apartment. Inside the apartment, the brothers lived in secrecy and paranoia. Tamerlan was meticulous, rereading instruction manuals and practicing connections. He made test circuits, ensuring the wiring was flawless. Jakhar assisted, though less confident. He was nervous but obedient. They often conducted bomb-making at night to avoid drawing attention. Neighbors noticed little out of the ordinary, though some would later recall faint chemical smells and a sense of unease. They stored the finished bombs in backpacks and prepared for martyrdom. Tamerlan recorded a video claiming responsibility and justifying the attack as retaliation for the killing of Muslims in Iraq and Afghanistan. Jakar wrote in a notebook about dying as a mujahid. They believed they were holy warriors, though their reasoning was tragically distorted. In the final days, they lived in a strange calm. They continued their routines, visited the gym, and even watched movies. But beneath this facade, they were counting down to a catastrophic act that would devastate innocent lives and redefine the city's history. Chapter 4: Patriots' Day, the attack unfolds. On the morning of April 15, 2013, Patriots' Day began like so many others before it, full of cheer, excitement, and pride. Runners laced up their shoes, volunteers prepped hydration stations, and security personnel coordinated efforts to keep the massive event running smoothly. Jakar and Tamerlan Tsarnaev, however, moved through the morning with a dark purpose. Dressed casually and carrying backpacks loaded with pressure cooker bombs, the brothers set out toward the finish line area with chilling precision. Surveillance footage and eyewitness accounts later reconstructed their movements. Around 2:30 p.m., Tamerlan positioned himself near the Boston Public Library on Boylston Street, where a large crowd had gathered to cheer on the runners. A few hundred feet away, Jakar moved to a location near Forum Restaurant, also packed with spectators. The bombs they carried were crude yet effective, built to maximize devastation. Each device contained nails, ball bearings, and metal shards designed to tear through flesh and bone with deadly force. At exactly 2:49 p.m., Tamerlan's bomb exploded. The blast shattered the celebratory mood in an instant. Fire and smoke engulfed the sidewalk. Bodies fell. Limbs were lost. Panic spread like wildfire. The boom reverberated through the city. 10 seconds later, Jakar's bomb detonated down the block. The second blast triggered even more chaos. Screams echoed through the air. People ducked for cover, ran in all directions, and desperately searched for loved ones. First responders, already stationed for the marathon, reacted with remarkable speed. Police officers, EMTs, and bystanders rushed to tend to the injured. Makeshift tourniquets were applied using belts and clothing. Blood pooled in the streets. 3 people were killed: 8-year-old Martin Richard, 23-year-old Lou Lindsay, and 29-year-old Crystal Campbell. Over 260 others were injured, many with life-altering wounds. Yet amid the horror, acts of profound bravery emerged. Strangers carried victims to ambulances. Marathon runners who had just completed the 26.2-mile race turned back to help. Hospital staff sprang into action, performing dozens of emergency surgeries in the hours that followed. In the face of terror, Boston's resilience began to shine through. While the city reeled in shock and grief, the Tsarnaev brothers vanished into the crowd. Surveillance images of them walking calmly away from the blasts became the most critical clue in what would soon be an intense manhunt. For the people of Boston and the rest of the world, the question now shifted from what happened to who did this and why. Chapter 5: The Manhunt Begins. In the aftermath of the explosions, the FBI and Boston Police Department launched one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. The FBI took the lead, calling the attack an act of terrorism within 24 hours. Thousands of tips poured in from the public. Cell phone footage, surveillance tapes, and photos taken by spectators were analyzed frame by frame in a race against time. The turning point came on April 18th, when the FBI released photos and videos of 2 suspects, dubbed Suspect 1 and Suspect 2. The images showed the brothers calmly walking along Boylston Street with backpacks moments before the blasts. The photos were broadcast nationwide, and within hours, the Tsarnaev brothers realized they were exposed. That evening, desperate to escape and inspired by a fantasy of jihadist martyrdom, the brothers made a bold move. They carjacked a black Mercedes SUV in Cambridge, holding its driver hostage at gunpoint. They revealed to the terrified man that they were responsible for the marathon bombing. The driver, using quick thinking, escaped at a gas station and alerted the police, giving them the vehicle's GPS location. This led to a violent confrontation in the Boston suburb of Watertown. Officers spotted the SUV around midnight, and a high-speed chase ensued, culminating in a shootout in a quiet residential neighborhood. The Tsarnaevs hurled homemade explosives and opened fire. In the chaos, 26-year-old MIT police officer Sean Collier was fatally shot while sitting in his cruiser. He had been ambushed as the brothers attempted to steal his service weapon. During the shootout, Tamerlan was wounded and tackled by police. Jakar, in a desperate attempt to escape, ran over his own brother with the SUV and fled into the darkness. Tamerlan died a short time later at the hospital. A citywide lockdown was announced. Schools, businesses, and public transit shut down. Residents were told to stay indoors as SWAT teams went door to door in a massive sweep for Jakar. The entire city of Boston became eerily silent, a ghost town under siege. The tension was palpable. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Armored vehicles rolled through the streets. Law enforcement agencies from across the country converged in Boston. The nation watched as the drama unfolded live on television. Finally, on the evening of April 19th, a Watertown resident noticed blood on a boat parked in his backyard. He peeked under the tarp and saw movement. It was Jakar. He had been hiding there for nearly 20 hours, bleeding and exhausted. Police quickly surrounded the area and, after a brief standoff, took him into custody. The manhunt was over. Bostonians poured into the streets, cheering and chanting USA, USA. Relief swept through the city, but the pain and questions lingered. Why had these young men, raised in the United States, chosen violence? What had led them down this path? The answers would slowly begin to emerge in the days and weeks that followed. Chapter 6: Aftermath and National Response. The capture of Jakar Tsarnaev brought a momentary sense of closure to Boston, but the impact of the bombing rippled far beyond the city's borders. Hospitals continued to treat the wounded, many of whom had lost limbs or suffered traumatic injuries. Families mourned the lives lost, and survivors began the long process of physical and emotional recovery. Memorials sprang up at the bombing sites. Flowers, running shoes, handwritten notes, and American flags adorned the sidewalks where blood had once been spilled. In the immediate aftermath, Boston and the nation struggled to understand the motivations behind the attack. Investigators combed through the brothers' digital footprints. They uncovered evidence of radicalization, jihadist literature, bomb-making instructions from Al-Qaeda's Inspire magazine, and references to extremist clerics. The Tsarnaevs had not acted on direct orders from a foreign terrorist group, but their actions were clearly influenced by global jihadist propaganda. President Barack Obama addressed the nation multiple times, praising the heroism of first responders and reaffirming America's resilience. He visited Boston for an interfaith service titled Healing Our City, where he told the victims and their families, "You will run again." His words, while symbolic, underscored a larger truth. The attack had not broken Boston's spirit. Lawmakers responded with debates over domestic surveillance, immigration policies, and the handling of terrorism suspects. The bombing reignited conversations about lone wolf terrorists and homegrown extremism. The Department of Homeland Security reviewed its threat protocols, and cities across the country examined their event security procedures. At the same time, stories of hope and unity began to emerge. The phrase "Boston Strong" became a rallying cry, a declaration of defiance and community solidarity. Fundraisers were launched to support victims. Celebrities, athletes, and everyday citizens donated millions to the One Fund Boston, established to provide aid to those affected. The Boston Red Sox, the city's beloved baseball team, played a key role in restoring civic morale, dedicating the rest of their season to the victims and wearing "Boston Strong" patches on their jerseys. As spring turned into summer, the city worked to heal. But questions lingered. What drove these two brothers, seemingly assimilated into American society, to commit such a brutal act? How could it have been prevented? Was it an intelligence failure or a deeper cultural disconnect? The FBI faced scrutiny for having previously investigated Tamerlan Tsarnaev and closing the file due to lack of actionable evidence. Some critics argued that warning signs had been missed. Meanwhile, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev remained in federal custody at a secure medical facility. Though barely 19, he was now at the center of one of the most high-profile terrorism cases in modern U.S. history. The stage was set for a legal battle that would re-examine every facet of the bombing, from motive to method, and test the nation's resolve to balance justice with compassion, security with liberty. Chapter 7. The Trial of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. The legal process surrounding Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was as emotionally charged as the attack itself. Captured alive, injured, and barely 19 years old, Dzhokhar faced the full weight of the federal judicial system. The government charged him with 30 counts, including using a weapon of mass destruction resulting in death. 17 of those charges carried the possibility of the death penalty. It was one of the most closely watched terrorism trials in modern U.S. history. Held at the federal courthouse in Boston, the trial began in early March 2015, nearly 2 years after the bombing. The courtroom was filled with survivors, families of victims, journalists, and members of the public. Some were eager for justice, others simply needed closure. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney William Weinreb, presented a harrowing timeline of the events. They showed surveillance footage of the Tsarnaev brothers at the finish line, detailed bomb schematics, forensic evidence, and chilling text messages between the brothers. More emotionally devastating were the testimonies of survivors. They described in raw, gut-wrenching terms the moments of the explosions, the horrors of losing limbs, and the trauma of watching loved ones die. The jurors, a group of Boston-area citizens, sat in tense silence as photos of the carnage were shown. One juror reportedly wept during parts of the testimony. The defense, led by attorney Judy Clark, known for representing high-profile defendants in capital cases, did not deny Dzhokhar's involvement. From the outset, Clark admitted that her client committed the acts. But her goal was to save his life. She argued that Dzhokhar was under the influence and domination of his older brother, Tamerlan, who had radicalized him and orchestrated the attack. The defense painted Dzhokhar as a misguided youth who followed a violent path out of loyalty and fear. The trial lasted nearly 2 months. In April 2015, the jury found Dzhokhar guilty on all 30 counts. The sentencing phase that followed was even more emotionally charged. Prosecutors called more victims and family members to testify, many of whom pleaded for the death penalty. The defense, in turn, brought forward character witnesses who spoke of Dzhokhar's childhood, his academic promise, and the influence Tamerlan had on him. On May 15, 2015, after 15 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its sentence: death. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev became the first person sentenced to death in a federal terrorism case since 9/11. The verdict sparked mixed reactions. Some saw it as justice. Others, including some victims' families, believed that life imprisonment would have been a more appropriate punishment. Bill and Denise Richard, the parents of 8-year-old Martin Richard who died in the blast, wrote a public letter opposing the death penalty, not out of mercy, but in hopes of ending the prolonged appeals process that would reopen wounds for years to come. In the years that followed, Dzhokhar's legal team launched multiple appeals. In July 2020, a federal appeals court overturned the death sentence, citing errors in jury selection and trial procedures. However, in March 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court reinstated the death sentence, ruling that the trial had been fair and the penalty justified. As of now, Dzhokhar remains on federal death row at the United States Penitentiary in Florence, Colorado. The trial offered no simple answers, but it brought a semblance of justice and finality. For many, it marked the end of a chapter. For others, especially those living with trauma and loss, the echoes of that day still linger. The courtroom may have gone quiet, but the legacy of the Boston Marathon bombing endures in hearts, in memory, and in the strengthened spirit of a city that refused to be broken. Chapter 8: Legacy, Reflection, and the Unbroken Spirit of Boston. As years passed, the Boston Marathon bombing remained a defining moment for the city and the nation. But far from being defined by tragedy alone, Boston forged a powerful identity through resilience, compassion, and unity. Each year, the marathon returned stronger than before. Survivors who had once been carried away from the finish line on stretchers returned to run, walk, or cheer. The race became more than a sporting event. It became a symbol of defiance, healing, and honor for the victims. The term Boston Strong, born in the immediate aftermath of the attack, evolved into a cultural touchstone. It was not just a slogan, but a living ethos. Public art, murals, and annual memorials continued to honor the lives lost. Martin Richard, Crystal Campbell, Lindsay Liu, and Sean Collier. Their names became rallying cries for peace and strength. Schools taught lessons about resilience using the stories of the survivors. Charities and foundations established in their memory supported others facing trauma and adversity. Security at large public events across the United States was forever changed by what happened in Boston. Law enforcement agencies improved coordination and intelligence sharing. Race organizers adopted sophisticated surveillance techniques, crowd control systems, and emergency response protocols. But even in this heightened atmosphere of security, the core spirit of public celebration endured. People refused to live in fear. They showed up in greater numbers, louder and prouder than before. The bombing also inspired reflection on complex issues: the process of radicalization, youth vulnerability to extremist ideology, and the role of digital spaces in spreading violence. Numerous documentaries, books, and academic studies were published in the years following the attack. Some sought to understand the Tsarnaev brothers' descent into violence, while others focused on community resilience and the strength of human empathy in times of crisis. Meanwhile, survivors formed a tight-knit community. They leaned on each other through anniversaries, surgeries, and emotional hurdles. Many became outspoken advocates for peace, disability awareness, and trauma recovery. Their voices helped reframe the narrative, shifting focus from perpetrators to those who lived on, scarred but not broken. One of the most lasting legacies was the Martin Richard Foundation, which promotes peace, inclusion, and youth leadership. In classrooms and sports programs, Martin's message, "No more hurting people. Peace," endures as a call to kindness. In 2023, the 10-year anniversary of the bombing was marked with a solemn ceremony near the finish line. Bells rang, names were read aloud, and Boston paused to remember, not with despair, but with pride and purpose. The same year, a commemorative memorial named One Boston Day was held, encouraging acts of kindness and community service. The Boston Marathon bombing was a day of unspeakable pain, but it also sparked a decade of unwavering strength. Boston didn't crumble. It stood tall, surrounded by a nation that grieved with it and cheered it on. And every year, as runners cross that fateful finish line on Boylston Street, they carry forward a message that will echo for generations. Hatred may strike, but the human spirit runs farther, faster, and forever stronger.